Shantytown is a heritage park on the west coast of the South Island, located 9.4 kilometres south of Greymouth. Besides the recreated Gold Rush-era village, the park also features an old sawmill, gold panning demonstration, train rides on a short 3-foot 6-inch gauge railway, known as the Infants Creek Tramway, and many other things. The railway runs for 1.5 kilometres out of the main town and up to a little terminus in the bush, with gradients as steep as 1 in 26. On this occasion, the operational locomotive was L508, and I had wanted to see this thing for many years, although she is incorrectly referred to as a train on the front page of Shantytown's website. In any case, this 240 tank engine was built in 1877 by the Avonside Engine Company of Bristol, England. She was one in a class of 10 locomotives, and out of those 10, 3 have survived into preservation. The others are numbers 507 and 509, and curiously, the surviving Ls all carry the numbers they received when they were sold to the Public Works Department in the early 1900s. 508, formerly 208, was later sold to Wilson's Portland Cement of Northland in 1931, but 507 and 509, formerly 207 and 219 respectively, worked for other industries before joining their sister in Portland. 507 was sold to Auckland's Museum of Transport and Technology in 1971, while 508 and 509 were sold into preservation 3 years later, initially going to the Tauranga Historic Village and New Zealand Railway and Locomotive Society at Seaview respectively. 509 is now at the Silverstream Railway, but hasn't run under her own power since 2019, and the last time I saw her running was in January 2017. 508's time at the historic village lasted from 1974 to 1998. It was the only time a working steam locomotive has actually been based in my city in the preservation era. Just my luck, and the damn thing was sent away to the South Island only 2 years before I was born. As for why L508 is now a southerner, it's apparently because of the original museum's closure. And these days, the nearest thing we've got to a heritage railway in Tauranga itself is the miniature railway at Memorial Park, while the nearest 3-foot 6-inch gauge heritage line is the Goldfields Railway in Waihi, around an hour-long drive north of the city. We don't get any mainline excursions around here anymore, sad to say. As for L508's old stomping ground, it actually still exists, in a way, but it's no longer the proper old-fashioned village/museum, similar to Shantytown and the Taranaki Pioneer Village, that it was when the railway was still here. These days, it's more like a generic base for community organisations, and it just doesn't look or feel right without L508 and the little railway. Besides the Whipped Baker and Turning Point Trust, there aren't any shops in the village that I find interesting. In any case, the village is served by Bayhopper bus route number 59, which runs from Durham Street, in the city centre, to the suburb of Greerton via Watling Street, but this is only an hourly service. I was surprised to find out that Shantytown is open 7 days a week, with the train running 3 times a day, leaving the station at 11 AM, 12:30 PM and 2 PM. As for these coaches, they're actually former UG-class freight wagons rebuilt to carry passengers. The round trip only took around 25 minutes to complete, and passengers could disembark and take photographs at the other end of the line before getting back on board. Besides L508, 5 other locomotives are based at Shantytown. 3 of them are on display in a museum next to the workshop, but more on this lot later. I rode with L508 on her first run of the day. The coach right in front of the locomotive was occupied by a large group of tourists, so I rode in the second coach, which was much quieter by comparison.
After that we ended up working for God actually, so now we paid for Over the winter time, yeah, so it was.
We're just pulling up to the end of the line, the log hauling area. There's all action here with the huge logs of rimu or totara being hauled from the forest by steam winches to this site, then loaded onto trolleys that are towed by steam loki down to the sawmill. You'll hear some of the sounds associated with the logging industry as you disembark from the train. There wasn't always a straightforward run down to the mill like this one. Steep grades, cuttings and sharp corners were common, so runaways were common also. New Zealand's bush tram lines were built by hand and hard graft. They were said to be at the extreme limit of railway technology. It was real bush block ingenuity. At the peak of the industry, over 250 miles of bush tram lines just like this snake their way through the west coast's thick bush. We'll be here for a few minutes, so take in the atmosphere and learn more about the dangers of the timber trade, the hauling and loading, the loss of tows and runaway lokies. Our driver and guard will be happy to show you through the engine and answer any questions you may have.
Scenery like this reminds me of the Driving Creek Railway up at the Coromandel Peninsula, although that line uses 15-inch gauge as opposed to 3-foot 6-inch, and it doesn't have any steamers, only diesels. Upon arrival at the bush terminus, passengers were able to disembark and photograph the locomotive. The driver told me that we were stopped on a 1 in 35 gradient, and I could tell the platform was on an angle, but I didn't realise how steep it was. To add to the charm of this setting, there was even a little weka pottering about at one point. The locomotive had stopped in just the right place to line up with steps on either side, and passengers were allowed to take a look on the footplate. I dare say this would be quite a novelty for a lot of people, especially if they've never seen a steam locomotive before. And then it was time to head back down the line. The return trip includes a stop at the old sawmill, where all but one of the passengers disembarked.
We're now heading back to the sawmill and gold panning. Shantytown is on the site of an original gold claim. We still do find small nuggets in the Susie area, so it's now time to head to the gold panning area where our gold miner will tutor you to find your own West Coast gold. Or you can try your hand at wild panning in the Susie area. Try your luck. Nuggets are found in the hills. Here's your chance to see what the timber milling industry was all about on the west coast. Step off and experience the Infants Creek sawmill. Visit the characters of the gold fields in our sluice area and experience the thrill of trying your hand at gold panning. When you finish there, it's just a short walk through the timeline in the rainforest to the village. Maybe trade your gold in the village for a cup of coffee or an ice cream. Or get into the spirit of the olden days by getting dressed up for an old-time photo. You'll find the photos in the Golden Nugget Saloon.
When we got back to the station, I took some time to go and look at the locomotives on static display before coming back to see L508 leaving again. The engine shed is only a short walk away from the station. Visitors were able to look into the workshop from the outside, but they couldn't actually go in. Shantytown's lone diesel is TR107, later 396. An 040 shunter built by A&G Price of Thames in 1957. As you can see, she was in the middle of a major overhaul on the day of my visit. For comparison, here is TR459 as an example of what a Price TR looks like in working order. This locomotive works on the Bush Tramway Club's line near Huntly. The Kaitangata locomotive of 1896, otherwise known as the Improved F, is plastered all over the advertising for the park, but she's currently undergoing an overhaul. The first static exhibit we'll take a look at is Climax Class B No. 1203. The Climax is an unusual geared steam locomotive built primarily for logging railroads, and designed for power rather than speed. At least 1,000 examples of this family were built across 3 different classes between 1888 and 1928, but today, only 25 of them are left across the entire world. 4 of those survivors are right here in New Zealand, but none of them are in working order. 1203 was built in 1913, originally for the Potate Timber Company of Matapuna, near Taumadru Nui. After many years spent running on bush tramways in the North Island, she arrived at Shantytown in the early 1970s. She returned to service in 1980 after restoration, but has been out of action since 2002 due to problems with her boiler. The next exhibit is Heisler No. 1494. This thing was built in 1924, which means she is 100 years old at the time of uploading. Instead of inclined cylinders, as seen on the Class B and Class C Climaxes, Heislers had their cylinders arranged under the boiler in the shape of the letter V. This particular locomotive spent her entire working life on bush tramways along the west coast, and although she's been based at Shantytown since 1969, she hasn't run under her own power and preservation. Now we turn our attention to the Mills A, otherwise known as Opossum. This tiny 040 tank engine, with outside Stephenson's valve gear, was built by E.W. Mills of Wellington in 1875, originally to help with construction of the Foxton to Palmerston North Line. She would go on to spend over 70 years working in industrial service on the west coast before retirement in 1958. After 28 years on display at a park in Greymouth, the engine was brought to Shantytown in 1986, but it wasn't until 2012 when she was cosmetically restored and put on display. Lastly, we return to the station to see L508 leaving for her second run of the day. I think Shantytown is well worth a visit if you're in the area, but the tickets are quite expensive, and you have to pay a separate fee if you want to see the gold panning as well. And if only L508 could come back to her old home, even if only briefly.